For this project, I'm using some little Dollar Tree mushrooms, and I'm going to make these over to make them a little more my style, more vintage. I'm just using some air dry clay for this, and I'm going to kind of shape this before I put this onto the mushroom, but then I'm going to flatten the bottom and just press this over the top part of the mushroom. Once I have this put over the top part of the mushroom, and then I'm going to use my thumb and I'm pulling from the center of my clay, just pulling it down to cover that entire top portion. So just keep working your way around the mushroom. Don't worry if you tear the clay, you can just smooth it all out later. Just do your best to get it all the way around. If you need to add a little more clay, that's fine as well. Once I finish, I'll just go around and kind of smooth it out just a little bit. Before I set this aside to dry, I did want to add a little bit of pretty spring detail onto these mushrooms. So I am using a few Dollar Tree stamps, and I'm just going to press these into the clay while it is still wet. And of course, I ended up doing this to both of my mushrooms, but I did end up making the second one have a different stem, and I used a few different stamps just to give it a variation. I also ended up using this little tool just to make tiny little holes all around to make it look more like a real mushroom. Then I set both of these aside and I let them dry for about 48 hours. Now at this point, you can paint your mushrooms any color you would like. I decided to make these look brass, so I am first going over them with 2 coats of some dark brown acrylic paint. Then to finish them off, I'm using a big fluffy brush and some European gold rub and buff and going over both of these. Another super easy project. I found this old oil lamp at the thrift store, and of course it's old and not really useful for its original purpose, and it was also missing the glass top, so I wanted to upcycle this and reuse it and repurpose it for something different. So I found these dried florals on Amazon, and you get a ton in this little pack. It also comes with little tweezers to help you place these pieces. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just picking out a bunch of flowers and greenery pieces that I liked and mixing them up, placing them inside of this old oil lamp. I was also thinking while I was doing this how easily it could be changed. After spring and summer, you could remove the flowers, put little pumpkins in it for fall or even fall leaves. So again, just a very diverse piece. Also, I want to mention before I started this project, I did wash and clean this oil lamp very good. So here is how it looked once I had my flowers inside of there. Then I just replaced that little top piece, and right there where the wick for the oil lamp used to be, I'm actually going to use that as a vase, and I'm taking some more of these florals, just mixing them up, picking ones I like, and I'm going to put them down inside of that little hole where the wick used to be. So this was just a fun little way to upcycle an old oil lamp for a spring project. For this project, I'm using a thrifted frame. I did add a basswood backing to this, and then I just painted the entire thing with a couple coats of some black acrylic paint. I'm going to be doing a textured floral painting on here. I thought it would be really cute to do some hydrangeas, so I am using some little spatulas and some Dollar Tree spackling. The first thing I wanted to do was make this backing actually textured as well. So I'm mixing a little bit of that spackling with some dark brown and black acrylic paint. Once I have that spackling and the paint mixed really well, then I'm going to use a spatula and just get this all over the backing. Then I'm using a large paintbrush and moving that painted spackling all around, just doing little circles, little motions, giving this backing a bunch of texture. And don't worry if you get this on the outer frame, you can just wipe off anything that you mess up with a wet paper towel. Once I finish this, I set it aside and let this dry overnight. The next day, I did take a big fluffy brush and I dry brushed some black paint over top of this so that some of that brown is still showing through. To make the hydrangeas, I'm using some more spackling and a little bit of this warm buff colored acrylic paint. I'm going to mix both of these together, but I am not fully mixing it. I want it to have a marbled look. Then I'm just going to use my flat spatula and I'm going to start making the little petals of the hydrangea. As you can see, it is really simple to make these. You're just going to be putting a little bit of that spackling and then just making your way down toward the bottom and around the edges. I think for this method, hydrangeas are probably the easiest flower to do. And once I had my first one finished, then I added a second one. And depending on how big your frame is, you could add more or just do a singular hydrangea. Once I finish the actual flowers, then I'm going to move on and do some leaves. I mixed up a little more spackling with some green and brown paint. Then I'm just going to use an angled spatula to make all of my leaves. Once I've done a few leaves, I decided to make my stem first before adding any more leaves. So I am just using that same color of the green mixed with the brown and a paintbrush and doing the stem. Then I will go back in and add more leaves. Once I'm finished, then again, I'm just going to set this aside and let that spackling completely dry. Be making our own bunny vase from clay sculpting. I found this bunny head template on ultimatepapermache.com and I will leave the link below so that you can download this for yourself and also check out her video on her bunny bust. Now, although my inspiration is from the anthropology vase, I did want to make my bunny just a little more whimsical. I'm going to be using some of this chipboard. You can use cardboard if you'd like, whichever you have on hand. And then I'm going to cut out my bunny head and the ears and transfer those onto that chipboard. So once I have them all cut out, then I'm just going to trace around the templates onto the chipboard and cut those out again. I'm going to be using some aluminum foil to make the bunny shapes using those templates. I'm going to just kind of squish up some of that aluminum foil and use masking tape to secure this to the template. At this point, I'm just working on the head of the bunny, and as I am doing this, I am just going to keep adding layers of the aluminum foil to fill out the shape of the bunny head. Also, at this point, you don't need to worry about any of the details in the bunny head, just getting the simple shape of that head finished, and this is what it looked like once I just had the shape finished. Which I know this doesn't quite look like a bunny just yet, but you have to keep trusting the process. I added another piece of aluminum foil over the top and the bridge of the bunny's nose so that I could make some indentation for the eyes. After adding that detail, then I'm going to move on to the front part of the bunny's face. They have puffy little jaws kind of close to their snout, and so I'm just adding little balls right beside where I'm going to put their nose. And I did that on either side of the face, just using the masking tape to blend that in. And the cool thing about the foil is you can kind of keep shaping it after you've taped it. And now you can kind of see the bunny head starting to take shape. To finish off the details, I wanted to add a little more fluff to the back part of the cheeks. So again, just balling up some foil and taping those to the head. Once I had those secured, then I just went around and covered the rest of the bunny head with some masking tape. Now moving on to the ears, for those I just bent the pieces of chipboard so that I could make that bottom part rounded into itself, and then again used a couple pieces of masking tape to secure those. Then it was time to just secure these to the top of the head, again using some masking tape for now to hold those onto the head. And I decided to just have mine pointed straight up, but you can configure them however you'd like. Then it was time to move on to the fun part, which is using some air dry clay to cover the bunny head. And for now, I'm just doing the head. We will do the body a little bit later. So I'm just starting out by breaking a bunch of little pieces of my air dry clay into smaller pieces. And I have a bowl of water here, which I'm going to keep my clay and my fingers really wet and just start using paper thin pieces of the air dry clay and pushing them onto my bunny head. Now again, it is easiest to do this if you keep your clay nice and wet. Not only will the wet clay act as a glue to itself, but it makes it so much easier to spread it evenly over the head. So I'm just going to keep working my way around the head and also doing the ears at this point. It's actually really simple, and honestly I found clay sculpting to be even easier than just using clay for general purposes. If you keep your fingers nice and wet, it smooths out so nicely. There weren't a ton of lumps in this at all once I was smoothing it out, and the lumps that there were, they just kind of looked more like the bunny's natural texture. So I do want to point out, as I'm doing the ears, you can see I'm leaving that inner hole empty. I did put the clay close down in there where you're not going to be able to see the ending of it, but I left the ears open so that they could be a vase. Now, because air dry clay is actually super heavy when you do this technique, I laid this down flat and let the head and the ears completely dry for 2 days. If I would have set this upright, there's a chance the ears would have fallen over. Now, because I have not attached the body yet, I want to point out right here that I did not put any clay on the bottom of the bunny head. And since the head is now completely dry, we can move on to making that body. I'm going to be using a scrap piece of 1/2-inch dowel that I had, and I'm going to put this in the center of some plastic bags. Just kind of wrap those plastic bags around the wood dowel, and then I'm going to use a piece of foil and wrap that around the plastic bags just to kind of keep them in place while I am taping this up. And as you can see, I left a little bit of the dowel sticking out of each end. And I'm just doing the general body shape, just an oval shape. It doesn't matter exactly what it looks like right now because, again, we're going to be putting clay over this. And I'm also going to add a base to this to help it stand better. So I'll just be using one of these little wood rounds from Dollar Tree for that purpose. And as you can see, I just drilled a little hole into the top of this wood piece so that I could push that dowel down inside of there. Now, as you remember, I didn't put clay on the bottom of the bunny's head, and that is so I could just use a pair of scissors and kind of just twist it up into the bunny's head to make room to put that dowel. And I know it looks a little funny right now, but once we get the clay on here, you're going to see the vision. But before I start the clay part, I do want to secure each of these pieces together. I used some wood glue to put the dowel down in the wood piece, and then to attach the head of the bunny, I'm just using some gel super glue, putting it on that dowel, and then sliding this down on there. I am going to be covering the wood piece with clay as well, just to make this look like one uniformed piece. So I covered the bottom portion, including that wood piece, with some more plastic bags, wrapped aluminum foil around it, and then again used masking tape to make it all look seamless. Then to blend his head into his body, I just used more of that aluminum foil, balled it up, and then placed that where his head and his body connected. Again, just using masking tape to make it look seamless. Then just like before with the head and the ears, I'm using small paper thin pieces of the air dry clay, keeping my hands and my fingers wet and the clay wet while I'm doing this, and just sculpting the rest of the bunny. Once I had finished sculpting the bunny with the air dry clay all the way to the very bottom, I added some little balls for the eyes and a little triangular shape for his nose. I also added some thin little rolled up pieces to make the illusion of some eyelids. Again, don't be too concerned with any lumps or clumps of clay right now. Just let this set and completely dry, and we can come back in and sand it once it is dry. And that is exactly what I did once this bunny was dry. I just took a fine grit piece of sandpaper and very lightly sanded over it. I wasn't trying to get rid of all the texture, but just any little pieces of the clay that were sharp or just needed to be sanded down. Then it was finally time to paint the bunny. Now you can of course choose any color you want, and the inspiration was a white ceramic bunny head. But for me, I wanted to make mine into a bronze or brass looking bunny head. So I'm going in and doing one coat of brown paint in the color burnt umber, and then to finish the bunny off, I am going to go over it with some European gold rub and buff to give it that brass finish.